Disaster Afloat on Lake Huron. The Tale of the Charles S. Price and the Regina. Chapter 1. The Witch of November. On the Great Lakes, November stands out as a particularly perilous time of year. Often referred to as the November Gale or the Witch of November, these ferocious autumn tempests can strike without warning and persist for several days. As the regional climate turns frigid, the lake surfaces hold on to their summer warmth well into the season. Such a contrast fosters areas of low pressure in the atmosphere, drawing frigid air masses from the Arctic to the north, while sucking in balmy currents from the Gulf to the south. The result is volatile atmospheric conditions primed to unleash winds as fierce as those in a hurricane, along with towering swells. Over the years, these savage November gales have doomed countless ships across the 5 lakes, with especially grim examples including the Carl D. Bradley, which vanished on Lake Michigan on November 18, 1958, and, naturally, the Edmund Fitzgerald, which sank on Lake Superior on November 10, 1975. Just 2 individuals made it through the catastrophe of the Bradley's demise. The Fitzgerald's sinking claimed every soul aboard. The perilous notoriety of November on the Great Lakes had taken root well prior to the tragic fates of these mighty ships. Back in 1913, a ferocious blizzard packing winds of hurricane intensity ravaged the Great Lakes region. Spanning from November 7th through November 10th, this tempest stands as the most lethal and ruinous natural calamity to strike the Great Lakes in documented annals. Dubbed the White Hurricane, the Great Lakes storm of 1913 dumped almost 2 feet of snow across the territory, accompanied by steady winds of 79 miles per hour and bursts climbing to 90 miles per hour. Swells on the waters soared to around 35 feet, while fierce snow squalls plunged visibility into total whiteouts. Foreknowledge of the impending fury remained scant until the waning hours of Friday, November 7th, at which point Coast Guard outposts and Weather Bureau facilities along Lake Superior hoisted red and white lanterns, a seldom deployed signal for hurricane-level peril. The ensuing trio of days would irrevocably transform the Great Lakes. As the gale finally subsided, the inverted shell of a freighter emerged, drifting forebodingly atop Lake Huron's waves. Given the multitude of freighters that vanished amid the chaos, pinpointing this enigmatic vessel demanded several weeks of investigation. Yet, the revelation of its name formed merely one thread in a broader enigma that still perplexes locals in the region even now. Chapter 2. An Economic Artery. The Great Lakes stand as a remarkable geological formation and a cornerstone of North America's economic development. Spanning a combined area of 94,250 square miles, these bodies of water hold 21% of the planet's surface freshwater supply. Shaped by the slow withdrawal of massive ice sheets at the end of the last ice age more than 14,000 years ago, the Great Lakes Basin stretches across the central eastern parts of the United States and Canada. Vast in scale, the 5 lakes display traits reminiscent of oceans, and they have been indispensable for commerce and movement of goods ever since the initial settlements by Native American communities. The area's abundant natural resources proved pivotal in driving the industrial expansion of both the United States and Canada. Before long, enormous cargo vessels designed specifically for these inland seas came to rule the waterways. These ships carried essential commodities such as iron ore, grain, potash, stone, and coal. By the opening years of the 20th century, The Great Lakes accounted for over one-third of the total carrying capacity within the United States commercial shipping fleet. As the lakes turned to ice each winter, operators and their commanders faced relentless demands to load and deliver as much freight as feasible right up to the season's end. The bold gambles these sailors had to make in pursuit of such targets turned maritime disasters into an everyday reality for those living around the Great Lakes. While precise figures remain elusive, rough counts suggest between 6,000 and 25,000 vessels have sunk there, claiming no fewer than 30,000 lives. A significant portion of these tragedies stems from the ferocious weather patterns that batter the lakes with particular fury during the fall. In 1913, however, the year unfolded with uncharacteristic gentleness, and by November, conditions across the Great Lakes had settled into an exceptionally serene and mild state, with some spots seeing temperatures climb into the low 70s. Chapter 3. The gathering storm seasoned mariners understood all too well that a fierce November tempest was inevitable, striking without mercy. Their greatest wish was simply that such tempests would spare them until after the last voyages of the year. In those days, meteorological predictions remained rudimentary, with scarcely any instruments at hand to foresee or monitor approaching gales, much less to broadcast timely alerts. The initial harbingers of the impending disaster appeared along the western shore of Lake Superior, the vastest and most profound among the Great Lakes, on Thursday, November 6, 1913. The following day saw a series of low-pressure zones merging with a massive weather front positioned to the southwest of Lake Superior, which then advanced eastward in the direction of Lake Michigan and Lake Huron. Subsequently, on November 9th, a fresh disturbance originating from the south invaded the area, driving humid air from the Atlantic across frigid atmospheric layers and unleashing torrents of snow and freezing precipitation, accompanied by colossal swells whipped up by winds of hurricane intensity. The most devastating phase of the tempests crept southward along Lake Huron that same November 9th, marking the most fatal single day ever recorded on the Great Lakes. Chapter 4. 2 Ships, 1 Fate. During 1913, the 504-foot Charles S. Price stood out as one of the most modern and sophisticated cargo ships navigating the Great Lakes. Featuring innovations like electric lighting, hot water showers, and flush toilets, this vessel represented the emerging class of steel-hulled freighters that were swiftly overtaking the older wooden ships that had long ruled the waterways. Throughout the opening 10 years of the 1900s, approximately 50% of the ships constructed in American shipyards made their debut on the Great Lakes. This surge in construction fostered a thriving shipping industry in the region, bolstered by a fleet of ever more contemporary vessels and a rising belief that these sturdy steel freighters could withstand the most severe storms. When it entered service in 1910, the Charles S. Price ranked among the biggest freighters on the lakes. Constructed by the American Shipbuilding Company in Lorain, Ohio, it measured 6,322 tons and relied on a team of 28 crew members. On the morning of Saturday, November 8th, under the command of Captain William Black from Cleveland, the Charles S. Price departed from Ashtabula, Ohio, carrying a cargo of coal. Initially, the crew benefited from unusually mild conditions as they headed westward across Lake Erie, aiming for the Detroit River Light some 150 miles distant. Just a short time earlier, Milton Smith, serving as the ship's first assistant engineer, chose to disembark prior to what would become its final journey. Smith had relished his experiences aboard and had built close bonds with colleagues, such as wheelsman Ars McIntosh. Yet, during the previous few trips, he grew increasingly certain that misfortune awaited the price. Although Captain Black urged him to remain for one last voyage, Smith remained resolute and took his leave from the vessel and its personnel on Wednesday, November 5th. Whether the other crew members shared this ominous intuition remains unclear. Regardless, on this trip, Steward Herbert Jones invited his wife to join him, and she assisted with cooking duties in the onboard kitchen. Launched on September 4, 1907, the Regina served as an unassuming Canadian freighter specializing in packaged goods, constructed specifically for the Merchant Mutual Line. With a displacement of 1,156 tons, the vessel stretched 249 feet 3 inches long and featured a breadth of 42 feet 6 inches. Crafted in Scotland by the firm A. Macmillan and Sons, it relied on a lone triple expansion engine for propulsion and had been engineered primarily for transporting assorted freight. Come November 1913, Edward McConkie took the helm as her captain. Now 34, he had already amassed considerable expertise navigating the Great Lakes. This assignment aboard the Regina, alongside its team of 20 sailors, marked his initial leadership role, and he keenly anticipated wrapping up the year's last voyage to return to his spouse, Amanda, and their little girls, Eileen, aged 2, and Amy, aged 7. Chapter 14. Chapter 5. Into the Maelstrom. As Saturday, November 8th dawned. A fierce gale battered Lake Superior, yet the Regina pressed on with her cargo loading in Sarnia, Ontario, situated at the base of Lake Huron, where Captain McConkie remained oblivious to the full scale of the impending tempest. Contact with the northern lakes had already vanished, since relentless snow and gales had severed telephone and telegraph lines across Michigan and Wisconsin, blocking any alerts about the brewing disaster from arriving at the ears of Lake Huron skippers. That night, the Charles S. Price glided past the Detroit River beacon. All through the hours of daylight, the air had grown progressively chillier, with foreboding snow-laden clouds gathering above. Steering his vessel northward, Captain Black aimed the prow toward the Detroit River's ascent, though powerful currents hampered their advance. Shortly past the stroke of midnight, they traversed Lake St. Clair and proceeded northward along the St. Clair River. The Michigan town of St. Clair served as the birthplace of wheelsman Ars McIntosh. At just 22 years of age, Ars had joined his brother Lee in emulating their father's career, both venturing onto the Great Lakes from a tender age. He intended to return to the water the next sailing season, and by committing to the price for this last voyage, he anticipated securing a salary increase along with an advancement come springtime. Ars had been setting aside funds to wed his betrothed, Kitty Tabau, a sweetheart from his youth, and the girl living right next door on Pug Street in St. Clair, the very community that now came into view from his vantage in the Price's wheelhouse. Just before dawn on that Sunday, November 9th, Captain McConkie aboard the Regina caught sight of the Price alongside several other large bulk carriers, the Matoa, the John A. McGee, and the Howard M. Hanna, Jr., as they navigated past the St. Clair River en route to Lake Huron. Observing this massive modern vessel eased Captain McConkie's mind, confirming he wasn't alone among skippers ready to confront the inaugural November storm of the season. Battling fierce gusts right from the start, The Regina set off from Sarnia, Ontario, at 7:30 a.m. As it ventured onto the lake, a shoreline observer by the name of Denny Lynn kept an eye on the proceedings. In the era prior to widespread ship-to-shore radio use, Great Lakes operators frequently relied on such spotters to monitor their vessel's progress. Years later, Lynn remembered the Regina looking unstable and overloaded, her deck piled high with sewer and gas pipes that rose well above the railings. He worried the freighter was doomed for disaster, convinced it wasn't packed correctly to withstand the stormy conditions looming ahead. The Regina's itinerary took her toward the northern edge of Georgian Bay, where she would distribute assorted goods to 10 separate lumber depots. Her payload included everyday items such as canned provisions, compressed hay bales, small luxuries like ketchup, wooden matches, and safety razors, plus the indispensable staple, whiskey. Come midday, Lake Huron's weather had turned perilous, though it still fell within the realm of a standard early winter tempest. The intense low-pressure front that had earlier barreled across Lake Superior was drifting northward, and in certain spots, the barometer was even climbing, offering hope that this routine 3-day squall would dissipate in just a matter of hours. Chapter 6. A Desperate Dash for Safety. Aboard the Regina, the initial hope held by Captain McConkey quickly diminished when a cold wind from the northwest started to intensify, accompanied by a renewed fall in the barometer's reading. His modest cargo vessel was now enduring the most enormous swells the inexperienced skipper had encountered in his career. While battling through the infamous turbulent seas near the entrance to Saginaw Bay, the northwest winds at 50 miles per hour abruptly veered toward the northeast and surged beyond 70 miles per hour, accompanied by even more forceful bursts. In that moment, Captain McConkey confronted a predicament that seemed utterly hopeless, and it was around then that he may have caught sight of something recognizable. The Charles S. Price, which had departed several hours earlier, was now heading back in the opposite direction, striving urgently to reach the secure confines of the St. Clair River. Regardless of whether he noticed the larger freighter, Captain McConkey resolved to reverse his own vessel's direction and race frantically toward refuge. This hazardous pivot required exposing the unstable, high-sided ship broadside to the oncoming waves for a prolonged period, exposing the crew to a grave danger of capsizing. Yet, with Chief Engineer C.J. McSorley exerting maximum effort to extract every bit of propulsion from the lone engine, they succeeded in executing the bold turn. The cargo freighter then proceeded to follow its previous path southward across Lake Huron, where sight lines had dwindled to nothing at all. Neither Captain McConkey nor the fellow skippers caught in the storm possessed any discernible reference points for steering. The massive swells rendered traditional position estimation unfeasible, leaving these commanders reliant solely on a magnetic compass and their gut instincts. Deeply familiar with the lake's character, Captain McConkey could probably pinpoint his position within roughly a mile. But despite his seasoned judgment, he found himself adrift amid the chaotic tempest. Charter Teetreats. Chapter 7. The Final Signal. By now, the lightship 26, stationed near Port Huron to direct southbound ships toward the St. Clair River's inlet, had been swept from its position by massive swells that surged entirely across the modest craft. The onboard team had no choice except to shelter within its confines, while brutal currents drove them perilously close to the Canadian coast. This situation meant that the sole remaining beacon for vessels seeking shelter was the Fort Gratiot lighthouse, positioned along the Michigan bank of the waterway. Throughout the darkness, the station's guardian, Captain Kimball, along with his spouse, labored tirelessly to maintain the beam's glow and the fog signal's relentless cries, even as pounding surf battered the sturdy brick structure and rising floodwaters swirled around its foundational stones. Peering out from the lantern room, they spotted the faint, flickering gleams of vessels ensnared by the gale, each one fighting desperately to reach secure harbor. Among those distant sparks was probably the Charles S. Price, positioned merely a short distance off, with Captain Black straining through the blinding squall in search of the river's access point. Surely, he realized that sanctuary lay within easy grasp. A bit farther northward, along the Michigan shoreline of the lake, close to the village of Port Sanilac, the Regina, too, was hurrying toward shelter when Captain McConkey abruptly sensed a heavy jolt emanating from the depths of his vessel, chilling him to the core. The hull had scraped the lake bed. It collided at least once again before surging onward. Reacting on instinct, the wheelsman veered the prow to port, steering back into deeper waters, and the craft broke loose with a sudden heave. Overwhelmed by fear, the youthful skipper watched as the gale and swells seized control of his ship. Seawater started flooding in without delay. To focus every bit of the vessel's fading energy on the bilge pumps, they let go the anchor in a frantic bid to keep ahead of the encroaching deluge. Eventually, he understood that their plight was beyond saving, and the team's sole chance at living lay in fleeing the doomed craft. As his men clambered into a pair of small lifeboats, Captain McConkey remained aboard. Isolated on the bridge of the ship he was commanding for the very first time, the 34-year-old Edward McConkey grasped the whistle and unleashed a prolonged, continuous wail. Those on land nearby caught the clear cry of peril from the perishing steamer. Yet amid the ferocious tempest, all they could manage was to hear it out and endure, sheltering inside their dwellings while the Regina's rescued hands struggled against the onslaught in an exposed lifeboat, straining at the oars toward land as their boat vanished into the swirling blizzard astern. Chapter 8. The Aftermath and the Mystery. In a mere span of 4 hours, Lake Huron swallowed 8 vessels and the lives of 178 mariners. When considering the broader expanse of the Great Lakes, the toll mounted to 12 ships vanishing with their entire crews, alongside 30 others left aground. No fewer than 273 sailors perished in the ordeal, although pinning down the precise count proves elusive. As the tempest started to subside, the full extent of the ruin gradually came into view. That Monday afternoon, November the 10th, authorities dispatched the recovered tug Sarnia City to scour the waters of Lake Huron. Initially, Captain Ellie encountered only empty waves amid the lake's turbulent remnants, until an eerie vision caught his eye. The inverted prow of a steel cargo ship, floating aimlessly across the surface. This find quickly sparked intense conjecture among journalists about the origins of what quickly earned the moniker Mystery Ship. Many presumed the wreckage was the lost Regina. By early Tuesday morning, wreckage from the doomed craft started appearing on the shores of Port Franks, Ontario. Among the scattered remnants lay a lifeboat belonging to the Regina, containing 3 of its crewmen. Nearby, additional corpses from the Regina's team surfaced, joined by 7 from the Charles S. Price. One victim, the Regina's wheelsman, Walter McGinnis, was recognized thanks to a note tucked in his pocket. penned by his mother back in Owen Sound, Ontario, urging her son to stay on his best behavior. Milton Smith stepped forward to confirm identities from his old shipmates on the Price. He verified the remains of Ars McIntosh and the chief engineer, John Groundwater. Oddly enough, Groundwater had on a life preserver from the Regina. This peculiar detail, combined with the bodies from both vessels lying so near one another, convinced several observers, including Smith, that a clash between the two ships during the gale was inevitable. Yet, once a diver managed to inspect the capsized freighter up close, experts established it as the Price's hull after all, showing no evidence whatsoever of any impact. Whether or how these twin disasters connect continues to baffle. A few speculate that perhaps one vessel attempted to aid the other, rescuing survivors into a lifeboat just before succumbing to the storm itself. Visualizing the precise sequence of such events, however, stretches the imagination. A more somber and plausible theory suggests that looters plundered the sailors' corpses prior to any official notification, swapping the lifebelt during a rushed hunt for personal items of value. There's a chance that confusion arose during the retrieval and arrangement of the remains, which were placed in a nearby furniture shop for purposes of recognition. The submerged remains of the Regina remained hidden until the summer months of 1986, at which point divers located her approximately 3 miles from the coast, positioned between Port Senelec and Lexington, Michigan. Investigations verified that the vessel had impacted the lakebed on several occasions. Furthermore, the site's condition offered insights into the concluding actions of Captain McConkey. Following the issuance of the emergency alert, the inexperienced commander, having exhausted every option to protect his ill-fated passengers and team, probably retreated to his quarters, enduring the encroaching blackness in solitude as death approached. Since the hull lay inverted on the bottom, the superstructure eventually gave way, allowing the captain's remains to drift free and eventually reach the shoreline along Michigan's edge of Lake Huron during August 1914. His spouse, Amanda, tenderly preserved the journal discovered within his clothing. Its final notation, dated November 7th, consisted merely of a brief note on that day's atmospheric conditions. The intense demands imposed on commanders navigating the Great Lakes, pushing them to load vessels to capacity right up to the close of navigation each year, persisted unabated even in the wake of the catastrophic losses of 1913. To maximize the transport of goods with optimal speed, the majority of those era's cargo haulers suffered from inadequate engine strength, rendering them particularly susceptible to harsh storms. Frequently, despite a skipper's conviction that conditions were too perilous, external forces compelled him to undertake that ultimate voyage. Such hazardous traditions endured deep into the 1970s, culminating in the Great Lakes' most notorious tragedy, the loss of the Edmund Fitzgerald on November 10, 1975. Story number 2, The Lost Ship of Lake Superior. The Mystery of the Henry B. Smith. Chapter 1. A Century-Old Secret Revealed. In the bright light of a May morning back in 2013, a trio of dedicated shipwreck explorers, Jerry Eliason, Craig Smith, and Ken Merriman, embarked from shore in their modest 22-foot sea dory, determined to locate a vessel that had vanished from sight for nearly 100 years. Despite numerous prior expeditions, this elusive remnant continued to stand as one of Lake Superior's most enduring enigmas. Yet the group remained optimistic that their latest effort might yield success. Their destination was a precise zone pinpointed by Jerry Eliason's spouse, Karen, an accomplished software specialist who had refined their hunt to a compact quarter-mile stretch situated about 30 miles north of Marquette, Michigan. Upon reaching the targeted spot, the men activated their side-scan sonar equipment, a custom creation from Jerry's son, Jared. It wasn't long before the device registered a substantial irregularity on the lake floor. Still, they tempered their anticipation, knowing such signals could stem from any number of sources. To investigate further, they lowered a remote camera into the depths. The initial scan revealed no clues. However, during the follow-up descent, unmistakable indicators of a massive sunken freighter emerged. Debris from iron ore littered the bottom. At last, the lens captured the object of their quest. In the murky gloom, the foremast of an enormous cargo ship materialized. Moments later, the outline of a pilot house came into view. Doubt lingered, though, as to whether this was indeed their prize. That uncertainty dissolved the following day as the camera glided across the vessel's rear section and illuminated the identifying plaque. It belonged to the Henry B. Smith, which had perished with its entire crew amid the ferocious Great Lakes gale of 1913, precisely a century earlier. Untouched by time and safeguarded by the frigid depths, this discovery promised to illuminate one of Lake Superior's profoundest riddles. Vad isen förband fautit. Chapter 2. The Captain's Ultimatum. As November 1913 approached, the Henry B. Smith found itself concluding a lackluster year on the Great Lakes. Harsh conditions that season had triggered numerous setbacks, resulting in expensive holdups and untimely dockings. This vessel belonged to the Acme Transit Company, headquartered in Lorain, Ohio. Executives at the firm had become increasingly irritated by the persistent tardiness and held Captain James Owen responsible for the underwhelming performance. At 54 years of age, the skipper boasted more than 3.5 decades of navigating the inland waters. His crew held him in high regard, yet he carried a notoriety for steering clear of treacherous conditions. Although such prudence in safeguarding his vessel and the well-being of those aboard would earn praise in modern times, back then it drew criticism. A freighter tied up at the harbor generated no revenue, and squeezing out the utmost earnings overshadowed concerns for security. Captain Owen had been at the helm of the Henry B. Smith from the moment of her debut in May 1906. Classified under hull number 343, this 6,631-ton steel bulk carrier had been assembled by the American Shipbuilding Company in Lorain, Ohio. Among the biggest carriers operating on the lakes during that era, she stretched 545 feet, 166 meters, in length and featured a 55-foot, 17-meter beam. Her propulsion came from a pair of Scotch marine boilers supplying steam to one triple-expansion engine, which turned a solitary screw. The ship drew her name from a notable figure in the timber trade, who served as the principal proprietor of the Ludington Woodenware Company in Michigan. Ahead of this concluding voyage, reports indicate that the proprietors delivered a harsh directive to Captain Owen: ensure the timely transport of the Smith and its load, or face the end of his tenure with the outfit that year. Chapter 3. A Fateful Departure. That harsh demand would eventually lead to tragic outcomes. Right from the instant the Henry B. Smith docked in Marquette, Michigan, on Thursday, November 6, 1913, to pick up its shipment of iron ore, it became evident that this wouldn't be the straightforward end-of-season voyage Captain Owen had anticipated. The usually relaxed skipper struggled to hide his irritation. His plan was to swiftly take aboard 10,000 tons of iron ore and set off without delay for their concluding trip to Cleveland, ensuring the season wrapped up punctually and leaving the vessel's proprietors with no grounds for grievance. Yet nature intervened differently. Even prior to starting the loading process, fierce gales and swirling snow enveloped the Marquette piers. Amid the bitter cold, the iron ore became stuck solid in the loading chutes. The sole method to free it involved dock hands descending into the chutes manually and pounding the material apart using sledgehammers. Such labor carried immense peril, and workers generally shunned it during these harsh circumstances. Nevertheless, the captain insisted on pressing forward. He required the smith prepared to depart as soon as the foul weather eased. Operations commenced on Friday, advancing at a tortuously sluggish pace. By the early hours of Saturday morning, when activities halted, the freighter remained only partially filled. Normally, the crew wouldn't resume until Monday, but Owen insisted they come back on Sunday, November 9th, to complete the task. Though hesitant, they consented, and the captain requested that the dock overseer send a telegram to the firm, informing them of the impending arrival. That afternoon, as the loading finally wrapped up, Captain Owen appeared noticeably more upbeat. The tempest had temporarily subsided, suggesting they might catch the brief respite of fair weather, essential for this last journey. He recognized the challenges ahead, yet after 7 years aboard the H.B. Smith, Captain Owen trusted that his vessel, stabilized by its 10,000 tons of iron ore, could withstand the rigors. He even believed the tailwind might assist in speeding them to their destination, compensating for the delays incurred during the cargo handling. While conversing with the dock hands, observers recalled him cracking light-hearted remarks about the ship dodging peril, though most lacked his assurance. At 4 p.m. on Sunday, November 9, 1913, as powerful northwest waves battered the Marquette breakwater, the Henry B. Smith ventured from the safety of the harbor into the expanse of Lake Superior. It's intriguing to ponder the span of time before Captain Owen grasped that the tempest responsible for their postponement was merely building toward its full fury. Chapter 4. The Anatomy of the White Hurricane. The massive tempest that struck the Great Lakes in 1913 earned numerous aliases, yet it endures in memory primarily as the White Hurricane. Although it fell short of qualifying as a true hurricane, this ferocious blizzard unleashed winds of hurricane intensity that pummeled 4 out of the 5 Great Lakes relentlessly over several days. The initial weather disturbance started to coalesce along the western edge of Lake Superior on Thursday, November 6th, before advancing eastward in the direction of Lake Michigan. In that era, meteorological prediction remained a nascent field, equipped with only limited instruments to gauge a storm's path or intensity. Come midday on November 8th, the leading front had traversed Lake Superior and was pressing onward through the northern reaches of Lake Huron. For the seasoned mariners navigating those waters, this appeared to mark the storm's fiercest phase, a harsh yet familiar gale spanning 3 days. As that primary system shifted eastward across the area, Captain Owen might well have identified the familiar sequence of events, though in reality, the disturbance proved far from commonplace. While the initial gale progressed to the east, a secondary front brewing in the southern regions surged northward at a swift pace, colliding with the first one toward the late hours of November 9th. In the ensuing 24 hours, gusts across the territory surpassed hurricane-level strength for prolonged stretches. Contemporary assessments pegged wave elevations at over 35 feet, or 11 meters, while later computational models indicate they might have crested at 38 feet or nearly 12 meters in height. Certain swells climbed even taller. On Lake Superior, a solitary breaker, gauged at around 50 feet or 15 meters, utterly demolished the pilot house of the L.C. Waldo. Durterfried. Chapter 5. The Last Sighting. Not everyone aboard or nearby echoed Captain Owen's assuredness, with numerous individuals viewing his choice to depart the harbor that night as reckless and perilous. Witnesses from adjacent ships noted the crew members on the Henry B. Smith securing the vessel's 32-2 hatch covers, even as it ventured toward the expansive lake. Venturing into turbulent conditions without ensuring the freighter was fully sealed against water posed a grave risk of disaster. Captain Charles Fox, commanding the SS Choctaw from a close position, deemed the weather utterly hazardous. He halted the discharge of cargo from his own ship and held position until the storm subsided, delaying his exit until the dawn of November 11th. From his vantage, Captain Fox observed the Henry B. Smith pull away from the dock and voiced his puzzlement about how soon the outbound freighter might acknowledge the peril and head back to shelter. Amid the thick snowfall, he and fellow onlookers caught glimpses of swells breaking across the Smith's forward deck. True to anticipation, the ship executed a sharp pivot toward the left side. It plunged into a profound wave valley, yet clawed its way free prior to vanishing amid the blinding flurry. Observers surmised that Captain Owen soon grasped the storm's intensity exceeded what his craft could endure, prompting a desperate push to reach the refuge of Q and O Point. That bold maneuver to rescue the doomed vessel marked the final glimpse anyone alive would have of the Henry B. Smith for almost a century. Chapter 6. A Cold and Silent Grave. With the tempest at last subsiding, reports of the widespread destruction circulated across the area. Several ships remained missing without explanation, although a communication from Captain Owen confirmed that the Henry B. Smith had departed from port. She failed to appear at the Sioux locks. Initially, optimism lingered that she might be among the almost 12 ships the gale had driven aground, left helpless in some isolated stretch of the lake. Details were in short supply. At the local port's offices, as covered by the Times-Herald newspaper, the father of a crewman aboard the Smith arrived in anguish, pleading for any indication that his boy had survived. Upon learning they had no updates, he broke down in sobs. Just a few days following the gale, the remains of second cook H.R. Haskin turned up adrift, some 50 miles westward of Whitefish Point. Later, during the spring of 1914, the bones of third engineer John Gallagher were discovered on Isle Parisienne. These stood as the sole recoveries from the 25-person crew. Scant additional remnants of the Smith ever surfaced. Come June 1914, someone retrieved a bottle containing a note asserting that the vessel had split apart 12 miles eastward of Marquette. Yet authorities rejected it as fraudulent due to its November 12th date. The Smith probably went down sometime in the evening of the 9th, or, at the absolute latest, during the pre-dawn hours of the 10th. That bottled note merely deepened the enigma surrounding the Smith. In the decades that followed, explorers located virtually every prominent ship that perished in the 1913 storm, many within mere days of the event, offering glimpses into their last desperate struggles. Yet, from the instant the smith vanished from sight, she slipped into obscurity, her fate unresolved until the wreck came to light a century afterward, positioned just 30 miles from where she had set out, severed in half on the floor of Lake Superior. The precise reason for her foundering stays a puzzle. Perhaps her team had not fully battened down the hatches prior to waves crashing across her deck and flooding the hold. Or maybe she endured a structural breach that tore her asunder amid the ferocious swells, though certainty eludes all who ponder it. Chapter 7. A Choice Beyond Reason. The ferocious gale that ravaged the Great Lakes in 1913 destroyed 19 vessels and left more than a dozen others helplessly aground. It resulted in the tragic loss of over 270 lives, cementing its place as the most lethal tempest ever recorded on those waters. Accounts of seafaring catastrophes often highlight skippers confronted with agonizing choices between survival and peril, dilemmas so harrowing that they defy comprehension from the secure vantage of dry land and hearth. Yet, with the Henry B. Smith, the prudent course seemed plainly evident. Even among peers in Marquette during that era, Captain Fox of the Choctaw, reluctant as he was to criticize a colleague, expressed astonishment at witnessing the Henry B. Smith depart harbor amid the raging weather that afternoon. To him and to various onlookers on the scene, it was apparent that a contemporary craft, like the Smith, stood little chance of enduring such brutal elements. Captain Owen earned a reputation as a seasoned leader prized for his prudent judgment. His actions that fateful day deviated sharply from his usual restraint, driven by intense external demands. Remaining docked might have spelled the end of the profession to which he had devoted decades. In the end, the call rested solely with him, though the prospect of inaction likely appeared untenable. He recognized the grave gamble involved, yet sailors rarely anticipate disaster striking their own command. Commanders place unwavering faith in their charges, regardless of the circumstances rigged against success. Tale of Peril, the White Hurricane, Endurance and Innovation. Section 1. Lake Huron's Wrath. The infamous Great Lakes tempest of 1913 claimed 12 ships in its grip. Its ruinous path stretched across the waters, beginning in Lake Superior and extending southward to Lake Erie. In normal circumstances, the fiercest gales of November tend to rage for about 3 days as they sweep through the region, a phenomenon familiar to mariners as the 3-day blow. Those who sail the lakes are well aware that getting trapped amid a November squall means enduring the storm's fiercest onslaught for roughly 4 hours, or perhaps 5 in the case of misfortune. Even that brief window of pounding waves and gusts topping 60 men apiece poses grave threats to the hardiest of skippers. Yet on November 9, 1913, Lake Huron unleashed unrelenting winds surpassing 60 meter that howled for a staggering 16 hours straight. Under such prolonged assault, the lake's swells surged beyond 35 feet. Crashing in quick, unforgiving barrages, often in groups of 3, that hammered vessels without mercy. Within a mere 4 hours, 8 freighters plunged to the depths, the majority overturned by the tempest's raw power. None of the crew members aboard these doomed craft survived to recount the chaos of their last instance. Though a few ships endured the chaos, many washing ashore in ruins after the blinding blizzard hurled them astray, with one deliberately run aground in a bid for salvation. Accounts from these battered survivors provide rare insights into the harrowing end faced by the lost souls, alongside the raw resolve, tenacity, and stroke of fortune required to outlast what remains the most lethal gale ever to scourge the Great Lakes. Turn to Lake Huron. Chapter 2. Queens of the Lakes. A flawed design. With the expansion of commerce across the Great Lakes, vessels navigating these waters evolved into a distinctive form, setting them apart from their ocean counterparts of comparable scale. During the final decades of the 19th century, these lake freighters expanded dramatically in size, fueled by the rise of North American industry and the surging need for essential resources. Among the typical loads carried were taconite, limestone, grain, salt, coal, cement, gypsum, sand, slag, and potash. The year 1869 marked a turning point in Great Lakes transport with the launch of the freighter R.J. Hackett. This steamer featured its superstructure split across two separate sections. The primary one, housing the bridge, positioned right at the bow, and the smaller aft section positioned above the engine spaces. Such a rectangular layout allowed for a vast, undivided cargo compartment that proved simple to enter and fill, while the bridge's forward placement offered skippers superior sight lines. Measuring 208 feet in length and constructed of wood, this ship stands as the inaugural authentic lake freighter, and its blueprint would dominate Great Lakes fleets for the subsequent century, persisting even as vessels ballooned in dimensions and shifted to steel construction around the dawn of the new era. The honorific Queen of the Lakes belongs to the longest ship active in Great Lakes service. That distinction passed to the 497-foot John W. Gates on January 20th, 1900. Come July 1911, it shifted to the even grander 617-foot Colonel James M. Schumacher. Given their dimensions and the tight confines of the St. Lawrence Seaway linking the lakes to the Atlantic Ocean, the majority of these freighters remained restricted to inland waters. Although these vessels excelled at hauling bulk goods, they came with notable drawbacks. To boost earnings, the majority of such bulk carriers were fitted with engines that provided far less power than their counterparts built for traversing vast seas, even among ships of comparable dimensions. In 1913, freighters on the Great Lakes generally relied on one triple expansion steam engine, generating anywhere from 1,000 to 1,600 horsepower. By contrast, consider the Liberty ships constructed by the United States amid World War II, 3 decades afterward. These vessels, roughly the same in scale, featured engines delivering 2,500 horsepower and were engineered with utmost simplicity to fulfill urgent military needs. The engineering capabilities of the early 1900s certainly allowed for more robust engines, yet opting for compact ones proved more economical in terms of construction expenses and long-term fuel consumption throughout a ship's service life. Moreover, these lake freighters were often stuffed to capacity with goods, employing gravity-fed chutes that resulted in heaps of materials such as iron ore, coal, or grain forming tall, pyramid-like mounds with sharp, angled surfaces, configurations that heightened the risk of the ships listing severely. Even back then, the habit of transporting such unevenly distributed loads drew sharp rebuke, and it may well explain why numerous freighters overturned on Lake Huron that year. Given this combination of vulnerabilities, coupled with rudimentary weather prediction methods still in their early stages, any mariner trapped by an abrupt gale would confront overwhelming perils. A tempest of the intensity that struck in November 1913 proved virtually impossible to endure. Chapter 3. Turning into the Maelstrom. As Sunday afternoon arrived on November 9, 1913, those commanding vessels across Lake Huron encountered harsh circumstances while directing their courses northward. For the previous pair of days, a fierce yet commonplace November gale had swept fiercely across Lake Superior and Lake Michigan, though signs indicated the tempest was easing its grip upon entering Lake Huron. Observers viewed it as the standard sort of three-day disturbance. Although the elements posed a formidable test, such gales held no surprises for seasoned navigators of the inland seas. Nevertheless, virtually every captain bound upstream reached a moment amid the perilous voyage when prudence dictated a change in direction, opting instead to linger until the waning weather passed, finding shelter in the secure waters of the St. Clair River near Port Huron. Aboard the H.B. Hawgood, from his position on the bridge, Captain A.C. May came to recognize the error in his judgment. That morning, even with official storm alerts in place, he had shared the outlook of numerous fellow commanders, dismissing the event as an everyday disturbance well within the capabilities of his 434-foot steel carrier. However, once beyond Saginaw Bay, the peril of pressing onward crystallized in his mind, threatening undue danger to both the ship and its personnel, prompting him to pivot southward and endure the gale from a safer vantage. Before long, Captain May found himself accompanied by the 18-year-old helmsman Edward Kanabe. For this novice at the helm, the tumult represented an unprecedented level of ferocity. Clinging steadfastly to the controls, he summoned every ounce of his physical power, merely to maintain steadiness. With the freighter riding high and unburdened during this leg, it pitched violently beam to beam, forcing Captain May to proceed on hands and knees across the entire span of the pilot house. As the gale gathered renewed force, sightlines rapidly deteriorated to near obscurity. Amid the whiteout conditions, Captain May could scarcely discern the outline of an equally proportioned freighter persisting in its northward struggle. Shortly thereafter, another vessel of comparable design and cargo type appeared, battling forward on an identical trajectory. The plight of these two crafts, the Charles S. Price and the Regina, had evidently turned desperate, yet the ordeal stood on the brink of escalating further. With vision already reduced to a mere whisper, the day's light at last faded, enveloping the whiteout in pitch blackness. At this juncture, an unforeseen surge of severe weather advanced from the southern horizon, drawing those upstream freighters that had veered away in pursuit of haven directly into the tempest's savage core. Chapter 3, Chapter 4, Aground but Alive. The Howard M. Hanna, Jr. Aboard the 500-foot, 5,905-ton Howard M. Hanna, Jr., Captain William Hagen faced the challenge of navigating without a clear view of his vessel's far end as he worked to pinpoint their location. He estimated they were positioned roughly 15 miles from Pointe Barque, near the mouth of Saginaw Bay. Yet the absence of any recognizable features left him uncertain. Suddenly, a fierce 70-mile-per-hour blast of wind forced the Hanna into the deep valley formed by a pair of towering waves. Enormous walls of water crashed down from both flanks, causing the ship to pitch and heave violently, with her propeller repeatedly emerging from the surface, rendering any attempt to steer her back toward open water futile. Caught in this dire predicament, Captain Hagen fought relentlessly to regain command of the enormous freighter. Just as hope appeared to fade entirely, a brief glimmer pierced through the frost-covered panes of his pilot house. It came from the Port Austin lighthouse, situated merely a few hundred yards to the southwest of the ship's port bow. In an instant, he grasped that disaster loomed mere seconds away, as they teetered on the brink of striking the shallows. He commanded his first mate to release both anchors in a bid to halt the runaway vessel. The hefty anchors plunged into the depths, but they failed to curb the Hannah's relentless drift. Moments later, a colossal swell slammed her sideways against the reef, embedding her port side firmly among the jagged stones, while the raging sea and gales battered her relentlessly. The Hannah came to rest aground, positioned just about 500 feet from the lighthouse. The brutal weather prevented any access between the ship's forward and rear sections, splitting her crew into isolated groups at the bow and stern, cut off from all communication. The howling winds and pounding surf started dismantling the freighter piece by piece. Panes shattered across her frame, and her upper works endured severe battering. A fracture soon appeared in her hull at the 17th hatch, allowing water to inundate several cargo compartments. Even her smokestack was wrenched free and hurled down onto the after accommodations. As the night wore on, the powerless crew could only cluster together in shelter, beseeching deliverance once the tempest subsided. In that moment, rescue seemed an unattainable dream. Lake Huron. Chapter 5. A Wheelsman's Defiance. The H.B. Hawgood. While the Hannah slammed against the coastline, Captain May aboard the Hawgood frantically scanned the horizon for the entrance to the St. Clair River. Out in the vast expanse of open water, his unease mounted as the vessel edged perilously nearer to the shoreline. In a move mirroring Captain Hagen's, May commanded his team to release the anchor in a frantic bid to halt their drift toward disaster. The chains rattled loose to their maximum length, yet they proved insufficient to halt the freighter's momentum. May later reckoned they had skidded along for roughly 8 more miles before he abandoned the anchors and turned his attention back to locating the St. Clair River. During this harrowing episode, 18-year-old wheelsman Edward Kenobi summoned every ounce of his energy to grip the helm tightly. Steadying himself amid the pilot house's wild oscillations. Drained and gripped by fear, Kenobi yearned for any escape from the tempest's clutches. With all sight obscured, Captain May turned to his remaining perceptions and gut feelings for guidance. Amid the thunderous fury of the gale, he somehow detected the crash of waves on rocks and grasped that they were hurtling directly at the land. Trusting his seasoned judgment, as any skipper might, May bellowed at Kenobi to swing the wheel sharply back toward the safety of deeper waters and steer clear of the oncoming sands. Despite his youth and lack of seasoned know-how, Kenobi recognized that such an abrupt pivot into the towering swells would likely flip the ship end over end. Whether born of deliberate reasoning or sheer reflex in the moment, Kenobi ignored the captain's directive and allowed the colossal freighter, propelled by the storm's unrelenting force, to glide unerringly onto the soft shore. The impact jolted with such ferocity that the entire crew was hurled about. Captain May later recounted how he was almost ejected from the pilot house altogether. The Hawgood lodged firmly in the sands of Lake Huron Beach, positioned just north of Port Edward. Her prow settled a mere 100 feet from the Lake Huron Hotel, an astonishing spectacle, no doubt, for the lodgers upon their dawn awakening. The sailors hunkered down within the immobilized ship, riding out the night's wrath. Come daylight, the truth emerged plainly. Had the Hawgood not run aground precisely when she did, her fate would almost surely have mirrored that of countless vessels lost beneath the waves. Though Captain may or may not have been aware of Kenobi's act of disobedience at the time, he omitted any reference to it in his later retellings of the night's events. Yet he understood full well that grounding the ship had preserved their lives. According to his statement, but for the crash on the beach just in time, there would have been another missing ship. The freighters Hawgood and Hannah sustained severe harm during the tempest, yet each vessel underwent repairs in due course and resumed its duties. Above all else, every member of their crews emerged unscathed from the terrifying ordeal. Fortune had smiled upon them. Chapter 6. Epilogue. The Scars of November. The infamous Great Lakes storm of 1913 exacted a deadly toll, taking the lives of no fewer than 273 sailors. It's likely that Captain May and Edward Kenobi stood as the final survivors from that fateful evening who laid eyes on the Charles S. Price, the Regina, and the Isaac M. Scott prior to their ultimate fates. The men aboard these ships carried the enduring wounds from that terrifying November for the duration of their days. In time, the majority ventured back onto the waters, even as recollections of the whiteout faded into mythic status, establishing itself as a fresh standard for the ferocity of a November gale. Survivors surely found it unavoidable to ponder the fates of those who perished. How was it that the Hannah and the Hawgood endured while the Price and the Regina vanished? In what ways did they set themselves apart from their seafaring comrades? How does one proceed after confronting mortality head-on and emerging unscathed? Each instant holds immeasurable value. Our end may arrive without warning. The only path forward lies in pressing onward across the waves and cherishing our present gifts for as long as they last.